All right, I've introduced myself once, but again, my name is Marika Fain. I'm an information literacy librarian here at Kent, and I grew up loving comics. We got 3 newspapers delivered to our house daily, and I read every single comic strip that was in there. So I read all of the Peanuts and the Calvin and Hobbes and the Boondocks and just every comic that you could read. And I grew up reading all of the superhero comic books. And I remember one day at the table, I'm in the middle of 3 kids, and we were talking at dinner, and me and my brother were going back and forth about something, and my mom finally looks at us and goes, "That's it, no more. You cannot talk about Marvel Comics anymore during dinner tonight." And we paused, and we took a beat, and we looked at each other and we go, "So how about that latest Batman issue?" My mom was so mad at us, but it was worth it. I grew up with comics, but then eventually I grew into graphic novels. And what makes a graphic novel a graphic novel? Does the laser work? The laser works. It's just not forwarding for me. I have captions. All right, this is kind of funny, y'all. I haven't presented in this room before, and our team has done an awesome job setting up all of the tech for us, so really appreciate them. All right, so what are graphic novels? What makes them different from a comic strip, a picture book, or even individual comic issues? So comic books are a medium. They're not a genre. That's a misconception that some people, particularly outside of libraries, those of us who are familiar with how you would classify things, would say. But a graphic novel is the sequential art paired with a long-form narrative. So you get to tell longer stories, go deeper into character emotions, but it's different from a picture book in the way things are laid out, that we have certain things that are hallmarks of a graphic novel versus just a picture book, which is pairing images with text. They're made for all ages. They're in all genres. I just had a conversation recently. We had a visiting scholar from Japan, and he was talking about how in Japan they have whole titles of manga that they're publishing now that are new titles for people who grew up with manga and who are now middle-aged or even pushing into retiring age. They have manga that they publish for them. That is their target audience. So graphic novels really are for everyone. If you can think of a genre that you can read a traditional novel prose in, you can find it in a graphic novel. Some examples that come to mind is I've read a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, but it was told in the Japanese Yakuza. I was like, all right, so I could read that and kind of mash them up. I recently read a middle grade novel, but it's Filipino folklore, but set in modern times. So it's siblings who are helping their family run their food truck, and then suddenly these creatures from Filipino folklore show up and start messing up their lives, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So what are the family cultural secrets that are popping up in that? So we also all know there's misconceptions and misunderstandings and stereotypes about comic books. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and I'm not asking you if you agree with these statements. I'm just asking if you have ever heard these statements. So how many of you have heard that, yeah, comic books are really good for reluctant readers, and we're going to get them reading graphic novels, but then move them to novels? This is sort of a gateway. All right. Who's heard that graphic novels, they're childish. They don't have any real literary merit to them? Or that, as I said, my early childhood was all superheroes. Comic books are just superheroes. They don't have anything else about them, no real depth to them. All right, well, I did a lot of research while I was working on this. I'm not clicking Michael, and Michael's clicking the actual thing. So the thing is I don't know if I can actually read these from where I'm standing. So I'm not gonna read them in full. And I do actually, at the end, in my documentation that you all can copy, I have the articles that these quotes came out of. But some of the researchers that I was reading talking about how graphic novels aren't just basic, they're not just for entry-level graphic novels or reluctant readers, but that they're for regular readers and advanced readers, and that they actually rival the best prose novels that are out there, that they stand on their own literary merit. The second quote is talking about how they're multimodal texts containing both the images and the text, and that those give each other meaning, and that these are meeting our Common Core standards, and that Literacy should no longer be defined as simply the mastery of linguistic written elements. This is going to be funny. And then this one is talking about how we all know as librarians that graphic novels are flying off the shelves. They're really popular amongst the students, but why there might be reluctance among instructors and librarians to actually use them in our teaching. Whether that's because we've heard of the stereotypes, we believe the stereotypes ourselves, but also it could just be that we're not comfortable with graphic novels. We didn't grow up with them. We don't read them ourselves. We're not familiar with how to read them. And we probably didn't get instruction while we were doing our own educational programs that talked about how to teach a graphic novel. So I have my MLIS. Now I teach some library classes here. I taught one of the first-year student classes, and they don't teach you how to teach. They just say, here's how to be an expert in your field. Now go forth and figure the rest of it out on your own. So a lot of us have probably never learned how to teach a graphic novel. And that's actually why I did as much research as I did before I ever started working on this presentation, because I said, I know how to read it, but I've never actually tried to sit down and teach somebody how to read a graphic novel. So we're actually going to start off with a quick activity. So in the center of all of your tables, there's a manila folder. So you're all going to need pen and paper to do this. I'm very old school, and we're actually going to write on things. So in that manila folder, there should be a bundle of just like comics that are bundled. They have no dialogue in them. So if everybody at your table just wants to grab one of those panels and spend just a minute or two looking at it and deciding what you think the characters are saying, what is happening in there. So I'm going to give you all just a minute to do that, and then I'll have you share amongst your own table.
Yeah, good.
I love all the tech issues we're troubleshooting at the same time. All right, I just want you to take a minute and share with people who at your table who have the same comic strip as you, or the same panel from a graphic novel, apologies. What do you think those characters are saying, and kind of what did you look at to like decide what was happening at that moment in the graphic novel?
I did this. And what's happening since she just says cool. And he's a genius, and he's like, give me the cool vibes, do it now. So not just Garth. He does. Like, I used to read these all the time. I'm not sure about your player.
All right, for those of you who are curious what the comics actually said, I actually don't have the Garfield strip up here because I found it wordless on the internet as was. So we have, oh, Michael skipped past one already. Oh no, I don't know how to go back. So depending upon what you have, if it's the panels from drama, it is the drama of being a middle school girl. My favorite is the top one where he's saying, maybe it's about time you started chasing after real men. And then she looks at him and says, why? Do you know any? That was my favorite of the panels that I picked. And then Nimona, it's the joys of being a villain. They're the protagonists in the story, but also the villains in their world. So it's kind of fun seeing that perspective in a story. So it's how are we're villains, but we're gonna have fun while we're doing it. So that was just kind of to get you all thinking about what are you looking at in a graphic novel other than the text? What is it about the visuals that's kind of helping you decide what's happening in a story? But also you can see how the text and the visuals give each other meaning. Depending upon what you wrote in your dialogue bubbles, it could be a very different thing than what actually happened in the comic, right? So it depends on the text paired with the visual. You can't remove them from each other in a graphic novel and have it mean the same thing. So that's where it becomes that multimodal kind of information literacy, where it's asking us to look not just at the text, but also what else is happening on the page. So the anatomy of a graphic novel, how is it different than prose? So we all know when you read a book, you start at the top left, you read across to the right, and you move down to the next line, and you rinse and repeat until you get to the end of the book. Well, graphic novels require a slightly different type of reading. So I have two examples from pages of different comics. We've got drama on one side, and then we've got Owly on the other side. And I just want to highlight some of the features in a graphic novel that are different. So the first thing we have is the panels, so the individual pictures that we put together to tell that sequential arc. So like I mentioned, that's what makes it different than a picture book. So a picture book does have images, but specifically in a graphic novel, we have the paneling that's going on, where it's the sequential images as well as the text that's telling a story. We have our bubbles that share dialogue, and there's different kinds of bubbles. So the dialogue might be what the character is speaking out loud. There's a different style of bubble that indicates that you're seeing what the character is thinking internally, and that one is usually like a series of bubbles that then leads up to the bubble, and that's what we think of as like a thought bubble. We're used to seeing that imagery even as an icon removed from the world of graphic novels, but that's part of being in a multimodal world. We're taking different pieces from different things and using images to represent things, and we've given them meaning. We have captions, which can be used in a couple different ways. So they can be saying information like, we've changed scenes, we've changed times. In this case, it's showing you the internal thoughts of our main character. It can be an author note, but the idea behind a caption is that it is adding a piece of information that you cannot get from elsewhere on the page. So it's adding to what's happening. And then the final thing we have are these white spaces between these panels. And if you don't know about them, they're called gutters, and they play a very important part in graphic novels. They're not just there to separate the panels, but they actually act as a little piece of space, time and space between the two panels, where we as the reader have to infer what's happened between two different panels. A lot of times, like when we see an Owly, the first few panels, it's very direct. Those moments are happening pretty much one after the other. They're in direct response to what's happened to the previous panel. Until you get to the last one in Owly, you see them eating, but then suddenly you just see a pile of things. Well, what happened? We as the reader have to fill that in. We have to decide what information we think took place in between that gutter right there. On the side with drama, I love this page as an example, because if you just read the top panel with the caption, and then you read the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and you read them separately, you're getting a different story than if you're looking at the page as a whole and seeing how they're interacting with each other through those panels and those gutters. Because if you look at them as a whole page, what you're seeing is the same character, same pose, but we can see that there's been a passage of time, a significant passage of time. She's in bed, she's outside, she's on her couch reading or doing homework, we hope. She's in the bath. But when you read the captions together like that, you see this is a thought that has been weighing on this character's mind. She has been thinking about it all day. It is just dragging on her. And we get that by looking at those panels together and reading that passage of time in those gutters. So there's some different elements going on in a graphic novel just than what prose is able to do because of its own medium. It doesn't make one better than the other, it just means they have different capabilities of what they're able to share with us and what our students are able to learn and what we're able to teach them. So what does this mean for information literacy? Those things that are different. So this is a very non-exhaustive list. I just kind of want to hit some highlights and get you thinking about some things if you haven't thought about them yet. So the first thing is just the visual literacy. We live in a very visual world. We all know that. Anything from road signs, you know that that sign means that there's a sharp curve up ahead, and it doesn't have to tell it to you with words. If you're like me, you ignore all of the signs on your laundry that tell you how you're supposed to wash them, and you just throw them all in together. But that is informed ignorance on my part. I know those symbols mean things, and I choose to ignore them. But we live in a world comprised of images. We have inference. I mentioned those gutters, where we're having to read between the lines, so to speak, and decide what's happening. And there's a lot of times in our world around us where the information that we're being given isn't complete for different reasons. And so we're having to ask ourselves, how do we get from point A to point B? How do they go from this piece of information to this conclusion? What do we need to know to be able to fill in that gap when we're looking not just at a book, not just at a graphic novel, but other forms of media as well? And I'll talk about that in a moment. So we have sequencing, just talking about how are things laid out and how is that driving the story? How is it telling us where to look, where it wants us to look next? Because if you read a graphic novel out of order, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it's not always as straightforward as just left to right, top to bottom. So the artists will use different visual clues in different graphic novels to say, actually on this page, I really need you to look at this panel first, and then I need you to like jump back over here and see how it kind of circles around. So there's visual tricks that they use. And then it invites slow reading in a way that just traditional prose doesn't always invite us to do. It asks us to linger on the page. We read the text. We look at the images. Maybe we looked at the pictures first, and then we read the text, and we go, oh, did I miss something? And we go back and we look at the images, and we see something that we didn't see before, because now we're working those visuals and the text together, and we're seeing how they're informing each other. So for some people, it can really ask them to slow down. Instead of just, I read super, super fast. The problem with that is I don't get to enjoy books for very long. And if I'm not really intentional about it, my retention is actually not all that great. I'll get to the end of a story, like that character, like what was their name? I don't know. Like they rode the horse in that really epic scene, but I don't remember their name. So there's a slow reading skill that's been lost in a world that expects us to watch everything in a 30-second TikTok video and then move on to the next. So there are different ways that these can be used all the way from our lower grades all the way up through our higher grades. Again, a very non-exhaustive list. There's a document in my additional resources that you all will be able to get and download if you want that gives like some more ideas and suggestions. But just talking about different kinds of activities you can do with students. So with our lower elementary, we can be working on that inference. We can be working on sequencing. How do things go together and tell a story? So that do they learn to read a graphic novel and then write their own short panel with like a how-to instructions, how to do something that they know how to do, where they're able to share information and learn about communicating in that multimodal, but taking knowledge that they have and learning how they can communicate it to somebody else. If you get a little bit older, do we go into like comic book biographies? You can read a biography by somebody, but pair it with reading an actual like autobiography novel or nonfiction book, and then comparing the two. What do you see that's the same? What do you see that's different? Do you investigate what are the sources? Where did this information come from? Where did they take creative liberty when they were telling the story? And what's actual fact that we can trace back to a primary source? As we go up, keep fact checking that. Now we're talking about bias. Okay, well, where did these sources come from? Is there a bias? Does the author have credibility? Why are they writing about this topic? Is it their own perspective? Are they writing the perspective of somebody else? What are these different kinds of things we can be doing? One of the ideas I love is the idea of doing a perspective rewrite, where you read a graphic novel, but then you rewrite a scene from a different character's perspective. And how does the story change if you're looking at it through a different lens? Because the main character might be like, man, this is awesome. And you might have a secondary character going, it's really disruptive every time you like lead a parade through the cafeteria and I'm just trying to eat my lunch and we all have to watch your musical number every time it happens. My daughters ask me, I love musicals. They're like, how does everybody know to sing the same song? That's musical magic. But what if it wasn't and somebody's sitting on the side going, again, why? So seeing how different perspectives can change what's happening in a scene. So there's a lot of different things that you can be doing. You can have them creating their own graphic novels. Again, super short list. We're just kind of blitzing through it because I'm just kind of wanting to present this information as ideas of things to get you thinking about things you could be doing. So I mentioned that this goes beyond just graphic novels. How can we take what we're teaching them through graphic novels, what they're learning about those things, sequencing and inference and those gutters and visual layouts, what does that mean for our students navigating the real world? So I have an example of just a website. This is a BBC website that's geared towards kids. I went and found it, popped it into my PowerPoint. And so questions that they can ask themselves looking at it. How do the graphics influence what they're thinking about a topic? How's the way the page laid out? What is it wanting them to look at? When they finish reading this article, what is the website layout itself trying to guide them to do next? Well, it wants them to click on more articles. And I was talking with somebody, I said, why do we always put the future reading on the right side of the page? Well, it's because that's the direction our eyes travel naturally. If you put them on the left side of the page, we're kind of going to ignore them while we're reading the text. You put them on the right side of the page, and we're naturally drawn to them because of the way we're taught to read. So comics are the same way. We read them left to right. So if you look at that page, you naturally eventually wind up looking at that right-hand side of the page. And then the editing. If there's a video clip and it's been edited, again, what's missing? What information do they need to understand how somebody got from point A to point B? So a lot of people now, particularly younger people, are getting their news from influencers. They're getting their news from TikTok reels. They're not sitting down and watching the nightly news with Walter Cronkite. I mean, that's not how they're getting their news anymore. And it's really easy to take one story and spin it 100 different ways, depending upon which information you share and which information you choose to leave out. So getting students to ask themselves, what's not being said out loud? What do I need to know how they reach the conclusion? What information is missing? What things are they asking me to fill in on my own with assumptions? And I have one more graphic to share with you all from a website when I was looking for this, just on how people try to influence our perspective on things. So the next picture is from an article on, they were going to be writing about Gen Z. And so they were inviting people to post their questions and their thoughts on interviewing Gen Z. But this is the picture at the very top of the article. And I'm like, wow, that really just invites a very negative perspective on Gen Z. There is nothing in this image that makes Gen Z seem favorable. It makes them look like wax screen zombies whose brains are falling out their ears. And there might be some truth to that, but is that all they are? It's not. That's who I'm working with as college students, and I personally find that image pretty insulting in the way it's choosing to portray them, because I know many students, that's not who they are. But that wants my feedback, and that's the thought process that starts me on, is look at Gen Z, glued to their screens all the time. So how can graphics influence the text? How do those two pair together and want us to think or feel different things? All right, so we're gonna do a group activity at the table for 10-ish minutes. We'll see how long it takes. So in that folder, there should be another set of papers. So there's 4 different full pages from comics from different grade levels. So for 1st through 4th, we have Owly. 5th through 6th, we have a page from New Kid. 7th through 8th, there's El Defo. And 9th through 12th, there's a page from March Book 1. So I'm going to give you a couple things you could think about. And there's also just like a little cheat sheet that goes with each page with some questions you could think about. So you can pair up with people at your table and talk through this panel and think about how you would turn it into an information literacy lesson for your students. So some of the things you can be looking at: what is the narrative flow? How is the story moving along? What are the implied actions that are happening that they're not necessarily telling you about? What are the character emotions that are happening on that page? So I'm going to give you all a little bit of time to work with people at your table. These are some suggestions. There's the suggested questions at the table, but how would you take this and turn it into an information literacy lesson with your students in your grade? And as Becca said, we can scale up and down. So if you work with high schoolers and you really think they've got something they could learn from Owly, by all means, take Owly and decide how you would do a high school information literacy lesson with them. All right, now I love the sound of librarians brainstorming together, but I'm gonna have Michael with his wandering microphone come around and see if anybody has a lesson plan idea to share with the class. So did anybody do a lesson plan using the page from Owly that they'd like to share? Oh, behind you, Michael. The other behind.
Well, I'm looking at Owly, and I see where he is shivering, cold, rainy, freezing, and the parents how the rise and the scratches of him in the rain in the background. But I think it would be better in color. But
it's a black and white comic. I guess we could color it in.
So, that's what and he is a character.
Yeah, so Owly is the main character, and then he's rescuing Wormy in that page. That he found Wormy.
Very well. Very.
All right, did anybody do one using El Defo?
Oh.
I was just going to say, whenever we talked about it, we were just talking about the fact that we had a student that was had this spinning wireless light system, and they had that exact experience with the table with the bathroom thing, and it was just really cool. That's all. I like it.
So for El Defo, one of the suggestions I saw was after reading it is having like students do like a mini research report on like different like hearing aids that are available for people, or even you could do ASL, and just what are different things that are available for people who are hard of hearing, hearing impaired, to be able to communicate and help students in a classroom learn to empathize and understand those around them rather than it just being a mystery, because when things are mysteries, that makes them really easy to make fun of because they're just an unknown. All right, did anybody talk about New Kid in their group? New Kid is one of my favorite graphic novels. I was looking for a specific page out of it, and I legitimately just reread the entire graphic novel this week because once I found the page, I was like, I'm just gonna keep reading. And then I actually stopped by one of the offices in the library, special collections, and I had the book sitting on the counter while I was talking with somebody, and I saw one of the work studies just kind of edge his way over, and then I see him kind of flipping through it, and I was like, Reza, that's one of my favorite books. And he's like, it looks interesting. I kind of gave him a little rundown of what it's about, and he was like, let me know when you check it back in. Like, I think I might want to check it out and read it. So if you're not familiar with New Kid, it's a black student who transfers to a really expensive private school in New York City and is a minority amongst minorities. And his adventures of learning to fit in and finding friends and being able to stand up and challenge things that are happening to him and other minority students in the school. And it really hits home with me because I've struggled my whole life with people calling me the wrong name or deciding they were going to call me a different name because my name was too hard, or thinking that my food was weird because I grew up eating food from the Philippines. So New Kid really resonates with me on that. So if you haven't read it, I recommend it. All right, last one. Did anybody look at March book 1 and come up with a InfoLit plan for it? I get you all skewed towards the younger books. So March is again one of my favorites, and if you don't want to talk about banned books week, I'm pretty sure it's one of the ones that's popped up on the list. So it is autobiographical. Senator John Lewis, he helped write it, and it's about his time. There's 3 books. He talks about his time with Martin Luther King Jr., the bus burnings, the sit-ins, which is what you had the panel of there, and it's really, really impactful, but presents it in a way that I think lets students connect to it more than just reading the words on a page when you get the visuals. I was reading it, and my daughter was at gymnastics once, and I got to the bus burning page, and I snapped that book shut so fast, and I was like, I will read that at home, because the last thing I need is a little kid in a gymnastics leotard walking up to me and seeing that on the page, and it caught me off guard. And I'm an adult who's learned about these things before. So, all right. Well, hopefully just starting to look at those pages and starting to ask yourselves ideas. 10 minutes was not enough time to become an expert or to even really create a lesson plan. So I didn't expect anybody to actually have like a whole information literacy idea by the time we got to the end of 10 minutes. But just being able to start looking at graphic novels and maybe thinking of them in a way that we haven't before, whether you've never used them with your students or maybe you have, but getting some new ideas on it. So we've got a couple minutes if anybody's got any questions. And then on my last slide that I'll put up, I have a QR code that you all can go into a drive and download. I have the articles that I read while I was doing this research. I've got some additional resources, some books that I found really helpful for. I didn't do it. I don't know who else is up here, but it wasn't me. Books with ideas for lesson plans. There's a website that pairs with a book called I think it's Worth 1,000 Words. But the website is amazing. It's got this huge, she keeps an updated spreadsheet where you can filter books by grade or topics. So if you're not familiar with graphic novels and you're like, I think this sounds like a great idea, but I don't even know where to start, and I don't have the time to go and research graphic novels that would be appropriate for my students, and how do I pair them with things that I'm already talking? People have already done that work for you. So I provided those resources for you all to be able to look into this further if you want to. But all right, any questions before I go to the QR code slide? No, because librarians are super attentive and have learned everything. All right, well, like I said, this was really more of just a primer. None of us are gonna walk out as being experts. I know a lot more about teaching graphic novels and creating InfoLit with it now than I did when I started researching this in May. Hopefully you know a little bit more now than you did 40 minutes ago. There we go. So we'll have the QR code up here, and then also when Michael sends out the follow-up email, I'll make sure to include a link. And somebody asked me if I can include my slideshow, which is not currently in this folder, but I will add it to the folder. So when you get the link with the follow-up email, it will be in there. But other than that, we've got a couple minutes before Michael will do his presentation. So again, if you need the restroom, it is across the hall. If you haven't picked up your swag bag, you have got the back table. And if you need your certificate of attendance or to sign in, that is at the front table here with Gina. And if you have questions, you can come and ask me afterwards when I'm not standing in front of the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Marika. Awesome. I think that was, I'll just share some of my notes as well because I found lots of interesting things in it. And I have ADHD and I like to share my notes. So, I think graphic novels, they're a really sophisticated art form. And I know just listening to Marika, like I learned a lot about kind of how information is organized. I always thought it was funny when I'd go to, Blockbuster Video or Hollywood Video back in the day, they'd have an animation section. Because animation to me isn't really a genre. You can do anything with animation, it can be for anybody. So that was funny. Although when Hollywood Video went out of business, I did buy a lot of DVDs from them, which was great. Also, I think visual information is really sophisticated, and even very literate, sophisticated people read information in different ways. I know that Martin Scorsese, the director, like Goodfellas and Departed, he doesn't read, he only reads dialogue when he gets a script sent to him, and then he goes back if he likes the dialogue. But to him, he prefers to get the story through the dialogue and the characters through the dialogue, and then if it appeals to him in some way, he'll go back and read the information. And I think graphic novels give you and students a lot of room to kind of explore how they read best. So that's really nice. And you might not know about some of the best graphic novels out there, because most graphic novels, if you don't read them, we find out about them, well, as librarians, we find out about them through many ways, but sometimes it's just through film adaptations. And I went to film school originally, and a lot of sophisticated graphic novels don't get adapted because they use the medium very, very well, and it doesn't adapt into another medium because of how they're using it. So keep checking stuff out. And I just want to make a funny note that young people are often very attuned to online graphics in ways that we aren't. I had some students at the junior high once, and they were arguing about cheese sticks and the quality of cheese sticks. And one of them said, "Doctors are going to hate me for telling you this one thing about cheese sticks." Because they're used to seeing that clickbait all over the internet. Doctors hate what I have to tell you about blueberries or whatever. And to them, that was really funny because they're so used to this information, they're really attuned to it. So, super interesting. We'll have a bathroom break. See you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Well, one last thought. One of those additional resources that I put in there in honor of Banned Books Week is the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. So they have lesson plans that go with different comics, but they specifically highlight comics that have been banned books, because if you aren't aware, comics get banned just as often as novels do. So happy Banned Books Week, and good luck to us all.